The notebook in the cafe. My name is Aisha, and I'm 28 years old. I work as a freelance graphic designer, which means I spend a lot of my time in front of a screen, creating art that tells someone else's story. But this is my story. A story I never thought I'd have the courage to share because it still feels so surreal. I live in Mumbai, where the city never sleeps. But oddly enough, I've always felt like I've been sleepwalking through life. My days were a blur of deadlines, client calls, and the hum of a laptop fan. I had never been in love, not the kind of love that shakes your soul and rewires your heart. I told myself I was too busy chasing my career, but deep down, I was afraid of being vulnerable. I didn't want to open myself up only to be left disappointed. And then I met Arjun. It all started on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in June. Monsoon season had just begun, and the streets of Mumbai were a chaotic mess of puddles and honking cars. I had a deadline looming and decided to work from my favorite cafe, the Whistling Teacup. It was a cozy little place tucked into a quiet corner of Bandra, with wooden tables and mismatched chairs. The smell of freshly brewed coffee, mixed with the sound of soft jazz playing in the background, always made me feel like I could breathe. I settled into my usual corner table by the window, opened my laptop, and pulled out my sketch pad. I had just taken a sip of my cappuccino when I noticed him. Arjun was sitting a few tables away, scribbling something into a notebook. He looked about my age, maybe a year or two older, with slightly messy black hair and a faint stubble that gave him a rugged charm. He was wearing a faded blue shirt, rolled up at the sleeves, and a leather bracelet on his wrist. There was something about him that made it impossible to look away, like he didn't quite belong in the chaos of the city. Our eyes met briefly, and I quickly looked away, pretending to be deeply engrossed in my work. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he had caught me staring. I returned to my designs, trying to focus, but my mind kept wandering back to him. What was he writing so intently in that notebook? The rain outside turned into a steady downpour, and the cafe started to fill up with people seeking refuge. A group of college students took the table next to mine, their laughter and chatter drowning out the music. I glanced over at Arjun again, and this time he smiled. It wasn't a broad smile, just a subtle, knowing one, like he understood something I didn't. My heart did a little flip, and before I could think, I smiled back. "Do you mind if I join you?" he asked, holding up his notebook as he stood. His voice was warm, with a hint of mischief, like he was used to getting away with things. For a moment, I panicked. I wasn't used to strangers approaching me, especially not handsome ones. But then I heard myself say, "Sure, why not?" The first conversation. As he sat across from me, I noticed the faint scent of sandalwood and rain clinging to him. "I'm Arjun," he said, extending a hand. "Aisha," I replied, shaking it. His grip was firm but gentle. "What are you working on?" he asked, nodding toward my sketch pad. I hesitated, feeling a little self-conscious. "Just some designs for a client. Nothing exciting." "Looks pretty exciting to me," he said, leaning forward to get a better look. "You're really talented." I felt my cheeks flush. "Thanks. What about you? What's in the notebook?" "Ah, this?" He tapped the cover. Just some scribbles. I'm a writer, or at least I like to think I am. A writer? I repeated, intrigued. What do you write? Mostly stories no one reads, he said with a laugh. But I'm working on something new. A novel, actually. Wow, I said, genuinely impressed. What's it about? He hesitated, as if debating whether to share. It's a love story, he finally said. But not the typical kind. It's about two people who meet by chance and change each other's lives in ways they never expected. I raised an eyebrow. Sounds a lot like every love story. He grinned. Maybe. But the magic is in how you tell it. A connection forms. That afternoon turned into evening as we sat there, talking about everything and nothing. We bonded over our shared love for books, our favorite movies, and our mutual disdain for pineapple on pizza. By the time the rain stopped, the cafe was almost empty. I hadn't gotten any work done, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt alive, like I had stepped out of a fog and into the sunlight. Before we parted ways, Arjun asked for my number. For research purposes, he joked, waving his notebook. I gave it to him, and as I walked home that night, I couldn't stop smiling. The blossoming of love. Over the next few weeks, Arjun and I fell into an easy rhythm. We met often, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes at the park, or even just walking along the beach. He would read me snippets of his novel, and I would show him my designs. He had a way of making me feel seen, like I wasn't just another face in the crowd. And I began to notice things about him, too. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. The way he always carried a book in his bag. The way he listened, really listened, when I spoke. One evening, as we watched the sun set over Marine Drive, he turned to me and said, "Aisha, you've inspired me." I laughed. "Inspired you to do what?" "To believe in love," he said, his voice soft but steady. My breath caught. "Arjun, I mean it," he said, taking my hand. "You make me want to be a better person. You make me want to write a better story." I didn't know what to say, so I just squeezed his hand and hoped he understood. The climax. Like all stories, ours had its challenges. Arjun was offered a publishing deal that required him to move to Delhi for a year. It was an amazing opportunity, and I was thrilled for him, but the thought of being apart terrified me. "Long distance never works," I told him one night as we sat on my balcony. "It will if we want it to," he said. "Do we?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. "I do." And just like that, I knew I did too. The next chapter. After Arjun returned to Mumbai, life felt like a dream. We spent hours together, often reminiscing about the early days of our relationship and laughing about how nervous we both were when we first met. The novel he dedicated to me had become a bestseller, and I couldn't have been prouder of him. But as the days turned into weeks, reality began to seep back in. Arjun's newfound success brought with it a whirlwind of responsibilities, interviews, book tours, and events. At the same time, my freelance projects started picking up. I was thrilled to finally land a contract with a major lifestyle brand, but it meant longer hours and tighter deadlines. We both wanted to be there for each other, but there were moments when it felt like we were two ships passing in the night. The strain of distance. One evening, as I worked late in my studio, my phone buzzed with a message from Arjun. "Hey, I just landed in Kolkata. Call you after the event tonight?" I stared at the screen, a pang of loneliness washing over me. Arjun had been traveling nonstop for weeks, and I missed him more than I wanted to admit. "Sure," I replied, trying to keep the disappointment out of my tone. When he called later that night, his voice was warm but exhausted. "Hey, Aisha, how was your day?" "It was fine," I said, forcing a smile even though he couldn't see it. "Just fine?" he asked, his tone teasing. "It was busy," I admitted. "I barely had time to eat." "You have to take care of yourself," he said gently. "Promise me you'll do that?" "I promise," I said, though my voice wavered. We talked for a few more minutes before he had to go. As I hung up, I realized how much I missed the days when we could sit together for hours, sharing stories and dreams. The turning point, the strain between us reached its peak a month later, during one of Arjun's rare weekends at home. We had planned a quiet dinner, but he spent most of the evening answering calls and replying to emails. "Arjun?" I finally said, unable to hide my frustration. "Can it wait?" He looked up from his phone, startled. "What? Can't you take a break, just for tonight?" "I'm sorry," he said, setting his phone down. "It's just, there's so much going on right now." "I know," I said, my voice softening. "But I miss you. I feel like we're always playing catch-up." He reached across the table and took my hand. "Aisha, I miss you too. I'm trying to balance everything, but I know I've been falling short." "We both have," I admitted, "but I don't want us to lose what we have. I don't want us to become strangers." "We won't," he said, his grip tightening. "We just need to figure this out. Together. Rebuilding together." Over the next few weeks, we made a conscious effort to prioritize each other. We set aside no work evenings, where we would cook dinner together, watch old movies, or simply sit on the balcony and talk. Arjun also began including me in his world, inviting me to his events and introducing me as the woman who inspired his work. Seeing the way he spoke about me, with such pride and love, reminded me why I fell for him in the first place. I, in turn, opened up about my fears and insecurities, the pressure I felt to succeed, the fear of being left behind. And Arjun listened, truly listened, just as he always had. A new dream one evening. As we walked along the beach, Arjun turned to me and said, "Aisha, have you ever thought about starting something of your own?" "What do you mean?" I asked, intrigued. "You're so talented," he said. "What if you opened your own design studio? You could build something incredible." The idea both excited and terrified me. "I don't know, Arjun. What if I fail?" "Then you try again," he said simply. "You've always believed in me. Let me believe in you." His words stayed with me, and over the next few months, I began laying the groundwork for my own studio. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt and sleepless nights, but Arjun was there every step of the way, cheering me on. The proposal, a year later, on a crisp December evening, Arjun surprised me with dinner at the Whistling Teacup. As we sat at our old table, reminiscing about the day we met, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Aisha, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. You've been my inspiration, my partner, and my best friend. You've made me believe in love, and I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me? Tears filled my eyes as I nodded. Yes, I whispered, barely able to speak. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, the entire cafe erupted in applause. It felt like the perfect full circle, a new beginning born from the place where it all started. Building a life together, the months following our engagement were a whirlwind of planning, laughter, and the occasional disagreement about wedding details. Arjun wanted a small, intimate ceremony, while I leaned towards something a little grander. Nothing over the top, but enough to make it feel like a celebration of our journey. Eventually, we settled on a compromise. An elegant outdoor wedding at a lush garden venue in Lonavala with just close friends and family. On the morning of our wedding, I woke up to a text from Arjun. Today I get to marry my best friend. See you at the altar, love. Those simple words brought tears to my eyes. As I stood in front of the mirror later, dressed in a pastel pink lehenga that shimmered softly in the sunlight, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was it. The start of forever. The wedding day. The ceremony was everything I had hoped for and more. As I walked down the aisle, my heart raced, but the moment I saw Arjun waiting for me, all my nerves melted away. He looked at me like I was the only person in the world, and in that moment, I knew we were exactly where we were meant to be. When the priest declared us husband and wife, Arjun whispered, "You've made me the happiest man alive, Aisha." The reception was filled with laughter, heartfelt speeches, and plenty of dancing. My best friend, Zara, made everyone tear up with her speech about how Arjun and I were proof that love could be both simple and extraordinary, settling into married life. The weeks after the wedding were a mix of excitement and adjustment. We moved into a cozy two-bedroom apartment in Bandra, where the living room walls were soon adorned with my artwork and Arjun's framed book covers. Our life together was far from perfect, but it was ours. There were mornings when we'd argue over who forgot to buy milk, followed by evenings spent cooking together, laughing over our attempts to recreate recipes from YouTube. Arjun's work continued to thrive, and so did mine. My design studio began attracting more clients, and I found myself busier than ever. Balancing work and marriage was a challenge, but we made it a priority to carve out time for each other, whether it was a late-night drive along Marine Drive or a lazy Sunday spent binge-watching our favorite shows. The first major challenge about a year into our marriage, Arjun received an offer to turn his first novel into a feature film. It was an incredible opportunity, but it came with a catch. The production would be based in Hyderabad, and he would need to spend several months there. When he broke the news to me, I could see the excitement in his eyes, but also the hesitation. "What do you think, Aisha?" he asked. "Should I take it?" I wanted to be supportive, but the thought of being apart again scared me. "Arjun, this is your dream," I said finally. How can I not want you to go for it? And what about us? He asked softly. We'll make it work, I said, even as my heart ached at the thought. The next few months were tough. Arjun and I spoke every day, but the distance made me realize how much I relied on his presence. I threw myself into my work to distract myself, but there were nights when I'd sit by the window, staring at the city lights, and wish he were there. A lesson in love. One evening, Arjun surprised me by showing up at the door unannounced. I couldn't stay away, he said, wrapping me in a tight hug. I laughed through my tears. You're supposed to be in Hyderabad. I missed you too much, he admitted. I know this project is important, but nothing matters more than us. That night, as we sat on the balcony, watching the stars, I realized something important. Love isn't just about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. A new chapter. After Arjun's film project wrapped up, we decided to take a much-needed vacation, a trip to Europe that we had always dreamed of. From exploring the romantic streets of Paris to getting lost in the canals of Venice, every moment felt like a reminder of how far we had come. During a quiet evening in Santorini, as we watched the sun dip below the horizon, Arjun took my hand and said, Aisha, I want to write our story next. A real one, our highs, our lows, everything in between. What do you think? I smiled. I think it's a story worth telling. Growing together, months after Arjun began writing our story, I started noticing small changes in him. He would stare at the screen for hours, his fingers poised over the keyboard but unmoving. When I asked what was wrong, he'd smile faintly and say, Nothing, just trying to find the right words. At first, I thought it was normal. Every writer hits a block sometimes. But over time, I realized it was more than that. Arjun, the man who could weave entire worlds with his words, was struggling to write about us. One evening, as we sat on the couch, I gently took his hand. Arjun, what's really going on? He hesitated before finally admitting, I'm scared, Aisha. Writing fiction is easy because it's not real. But this, our story, what if I don't do it justice? His vulnerability broke my heart. Arjun, I said softly, you don't have to make it perfect. Just make it honest. That's what makes our story special. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. You're right, as always. A new dream. With time, Arjun found his rhythm again, pouring his heart into the manuscript. Meanwhile, my design studio was thriving, and I started hiring a small team to help with the workload. Life felt like a delicate balancing act, but we were happy. One afternoon, as we were cleaning out the spare room to turn it into a proper home office, I stumbled across an old box of Arjun's notebooks. Look at this, I said, pulling one out and flipping through the pages. Arjun glanced over and smiled. Ah, my early masterpieces. As I read aloud some of his old, unfinished stories, we both burst into laughter at how far he had come. But there was one notebook, smaller and more worn than the rest, that caught my eye. What's this one? I asked. Arjun's expression softened. That's my very first notebook, the one I had with me the day we met. I held it close, feeling a wave of nostalgia. You kept it all this time? Of course, he said. It's where our story began. A new chapter. A few weeks later, Arjun surprised me with a printed draft of his book. I want you to be the first to read it, he said, handing it to me. As I turned the pages, I found myself laughing, crying, and marveling at how beautifully he had captured our journey. It wasn't just a love story, it was a testament to the strength, patience, and courage it takes to build a life together. When I finished, I hugged him tightly. It's perfect, Arjun, and it's us. The book was published a few months later and received an overwhelming response. Readers from all over reached out, sharing how our story had inspired them. It felt surreal, knowing that something so personal had touched so many lives. The next big step, not long after the book's release, life threw us a curveball. I found out I was pregnant. I'll never forget the moment I told Arjun. We were sitting on the balcony, watching the rain, when I handed him a tiny box. Inside was a pair of baby shoes. He stared at them for a moment, then looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. Are you serious? I nodded, tears streaming down my face. We're going to be parents. Arjun pulled me into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. This is the best chapter yet. Parenthood and beyond pregnancy brought its own set of challenges, from morning sickness to late-night cravings that had Arjun driving across the city for mango ice cream. But through it all, he was by my side, making me laugh even on the hardest days. When our daughter Mira was born, everything changed. Holding her for the first time was overwhelming, and I realized that love wasn't finite. It only grew. Arjun was a natural as a father, singing lullabies in his slightly off-key voice and making silly faces that never failed to make Mira giggle. Watching him with her made me fall in love with him all over again. Shay, a family adventure. As Mira grew, we embraced the chaos of parenthood, the sleepless nights, the messy meals, and the endless questions that only a curious toddler could ask. One day, as we sat in the park watching Mira play, Arjun turned to me and said, I think it's time for a new story. I raised an eyebrow. Another book? Not just a book, he said. A story about us as a family, about love in all its forms, between partners, between parents and children, between people chasing their dreams together. I smiled, knowing that no matter what came next, we would face it together. The ever-after life with Arjun and Mira has been a journey of laughter, tears, and countless memories. Our story isn't perfect, but it's real. And as I sit here, watching Arjun help Mira with her drawing, I can't help but feel grateful. Because love isn't just about finding someone to share your life with. It's about building a life worth sharing. And our story, it's still being written.